Hi class, here's your X-Acto cutting tutorial, and then we will get to putting your actual booklets together. So if you worked through your brainstorm, you figured out which of your compositions you wanted to use, you figured out the full size of it, and then you used your color grid to make yourself a nice reference so that way you know where each layer starts and begins, and that will help you a lot when you're cutting. So for mine, I just finished my entire one, made it a full inked out single piece, and then I made copies of it. I kind of cheated. We could do that as a possibility if you don't want to be inking every single layer separately, but it is also really cool if you do each layer drawn out separately. It'll look a lot nicer than just printed out, but for the sake of time, here. And when you are cutting, you want to make sure that you are using a mat. This is from the dollar store. It was pretty cheap. We will have some in class, and then also if you're just at home, do not cut just directly on a table. It will leave a lot of scratch marks, and it might actually get stuck in the table and then hurt you. So use at least like a couple layers of thick cardboard, but preferably use a nice mat like one of these guys. Like I said, these are pretty cheap. Let's see. All right, so when you are using your X-Acto, you want to make sure that when you're not using it, you keep your cap on it because it is sharp. And so we'll wiggle this guy out. And then this is how you tighten and loosen it. It should be tight, so the blade should not move back and forth. This is how you swap out the blades so you can pull them out. But I would very much like you not to be doing that unless you absolutely have to. So once you do have your blade set up, you have your actual artwork and then your reference. We want to make sure that when we're cutting, we are always cutting away from ourselves. So if I'm holding something, I'm trying to cut, but my hand ends up in the way, I'm like, oh, immediately no. You don't want to be moving anywhere where your fingers are. So you want to make sure that you are cutting away from wherever your hands are. And I like to just steady myself. You can see my my pinky. I just kind of steady my hand on the board because otherwise I get a little shaky. I'm actually going to be using an ergonomic one because otherwise my hands will start hurting a lot. And I've had this one for a little bit. It looks weird, but it's the same thing as the ones that you're using. This one tightens from the back, but it's just squishy and it just fits better. All right, so for me, I'm going to start, let's see, I'm going to start with the front panel. So that way we can start building this thing out. So what I want to make sure to do is cut out everything that isn't this pink area. So all of this middle section is what I'm going for right now. So when I'm trying to get a nice edge, and my lines are a little bit funky instead of perfectly straight, I can cut just straight down. You want to be nice and careful when you're doing that. You could also use a straight edge like a ruler. This one's metal, so that way it doesn't get stuck on the blade edge. And then what helps a lot is if you line it up, my edges are a little bit wonky, but if you line it up to where you no longer can see your line anymore, then you can make a few cuts across. And something that's helpful for when you're doing more of a thicker piece is if you do a couple lines across. But with paper, I feel like you will probably be okay doing a single pass. It might be a little bit harder to keep it nice and clean. Also, I just realized I made a mistake, and that's okay. So my first layer, I actually didn't mean to cut this part. So the pink is what I'm actually trying to make sure that I'm saving. So I didn't mean to cut this area, but that's okay. I can always tape it on the back. But now I want to make sure that I'm being extra careful and paying attention because I wasn't. Oops. So for this one, I'm going to be starting here and cutting to here. So if I'm looking at it, the direction that I'm cutting, you can see it a little better that way. Let's see. So I'm going to be starting off right here and cutting down. And that should be about good. Yeah, so this is a cardstock, so it's a little bit thicker. So it's kind of like cardboard, which I, again, recommend you go over a couple times. But for thinner paper, and even for cardstock, if you just push down a bit harder, you can usually get it to work out pretty nicely. All right, there we go. Cool. And so now I'm making sure to have this part stay connected because I don't want it to fall out. And then I actually like the kind of crookediness of this one, so I'm going to just cut along this line the best I can. And so when you're doing this, you want to put pressure from the top. And I like to support my hand with my pinky, as you can see, out to the side. But you want to make sure that you are definitely putting pressure down onto the mat and not like flicking it in a direction, because if the blade breaks or anything happens, I don't mean to spook you, but I just want to make sure that you're safe. We want to make sure that little tiny pieces don't go all over the place. Alright, cool. Alrighty, so we got that corner free. This is a little stuck. There we go. There we go. Okay, okay. And now I'm going to cut out this piece right here. So for this one, I'm going to go ahead. I want to keep the lines because I think that they look cool as an illustrative kind of tool. So I'm going to go ahead and cut right next to the lines. And I am making sure to hold the paper nice and tight, but also to keep my hand out of the way. And so for something like this, where it's a little bit smaller of a piece, and I'm just cutting out that one little tiny piece, I want to make sure that I'm like supporting both of these pieces of paper, because otherwise they might slide around. And typically it is okay to have your hand behind the blade. So I'm cutting this direction. So if I'm holding a piece of paper and it's behind, that's okay. Just be nice and careful, because sometimes things get wonky. So just make sure that your hands are safe. And then if you have a tiny, tiny piece, you can sometimes just stab that to get it out of there. Nice. All right, cool. And so for kind of weird, wonky shapes like this, I like to kind of keep an angle, and then as I need to swap it around or move, I like to just cut in just a straight line and then pick up where I need to. So I'm typically just cutting in the exact same line over and over again, which is part of why my hands will hurt if I don't use this thing. Probably will anyway, but that's okay. You can get some amount of a curve going if you just kind of move your hand pretty slowly. And so let's see how this thing does. Sometimes there will be little tiny pieces that get stuck. So you want to just kind of gently wiggle. And if anything is like really stuck on there, you don't want to rip it, because it might leave a less crisp line. But there you go. You got the first part. And now, so the reason that I didn't just have, I didn't just try cutting out like each piece from the single piece of paper is that now the border, I'm going to need that border on each piece. So I'm pretty much going to be just cutting out everything. Here we go. I'm going to set this down, make sure that it's in a safe spot. All right, so when I'm cutting out the pink, I'm making sure to cut the border and then all of the stuff that's pink. And then when I'm cutting the yellow, I'm going to probably connect the yellow across all the way, so that way it's stable. And I just need to make sure that it doesn't go beyond where this pink is, so that way I don't really see it, but I can have it be like a little area right here. And then I might want to do some of the side border. I don't really care about the top. I at least just want to make sure that I'm getting this and at least connecting to one of the sides, so that way it's not going to fall apart. But it's a lot better if you can get it to both sides. So my plan is to at least get it connected here, across, over here, and then over to this side. And we're going to do that one, and then for the sake of time, I'm not going to make you watch all of that. But for the green one, I will do pretty much the same thing, where I'm planning to have it connect to here, go across, connect over here. And then the blue is probably the easiest. You don't need to cut anything. For when you're actually doing this as a single piece instead of as multiple printouts of the same layer, you'll just have blank underneath any of the things that aren't filled in. And even if you wanted to, you could probably, if you're doing it this way, you could just fill it in with black Sharpie. And that way you can have multiple layers without it looking like there's multiple things going on down the line. So yeah, I'm going to cut these out, and I'm just going to show you while I'm doing it so you kind of get a feel for it, but I'm going to zoom it forward so that way you don't have to watch the whole thing real time. All right. And again, keep this on hand so that way you know where you're cutting, so that way you don't cut out parts that you don't want to, like I did. Okay. So now that I have it individually cut out, wow, like a little pop-up book kind of, I'm going to go ahead and fill in everything, or at least I'm going to draw a line around like where I need to color in for some of these, so that way it's just like flat black and I'm not worried about it. I need to grab a pencil and I will do that real quick and then I will show you what it looks like. So we have now just created a flat image into a multi-layer image, and now we're just cleaning it up. Awesome. All right, so for this next part, I just simply set down a piece of scratch paper, so I'm not going to be getting my table all covered in Sharpie. I used my pencil to, on the first one, do nothing. On the second one, you can barely see it, but I just figured out where I wanted to black out, and I am going to black out the borders on everything except for that first one. And so it gets a little more important as you go further back, because you want to make sure that you are actually getting not just the thing that was right in front of it, but the thing in front of that too. So I'm going to black out this whole section, and like I think there's one tree that I had missed, so it's going to stay not blacked out. And then that's going to add some extra dimension, and then for my last piece, everything that isn't that, so everything under here is going to be blacked out. So I'm going to do that real quick, and you can watch me if you wish, but it's similar to what I was doing with this, except now for each layer I'm just blacking out this layer and I'm blacking out the layer in front of it and all of the other ones, if that makes sense. Let's do it visually. All right. So for this one, I'm mostly just blocking out the border and that little bit right there. So let's get started with our Sharpie. And I want to make sure that I'm not coloring anything that I'm not wanting to, because this area has not actually been shown yet. So I want to make sure that I'm getting my border nice. You probably leave your borders not colored if you wanted to. And again, this is only for if you end up doing the style that I ended up doing for the sake of time and ease. And for that, you need to make sure that you are inking your original very nicely. It won't look as polished as if you had just done the entire thing by hand, each layer by hand, and traced over your original image onto a new piece of paper each time. But if you really want to focus on maybe watercoloring it or getting some extra dimension in a different way than just focusing on inking, then you can do that for this one. So as you probably saw, I took quite a lot of Sharpie. And you will probably run out of Sharpie pretty quickly if you do this method. I might recommend instead, I'm gonna move this so you can see a little better. I might recommend instead maybe painting or using like a thick marker. You just need to be careful when you're doing the little details. So now, let's see if I can focus my camera. So when we stack these in front of each other, it's not going to be quite perfect because I'm not able to hold them exactly right, but you can see the depth going on. I need to zoom my camera in for you to see this nicely, but we will actually assemble them now into our little books. And that part is surprisingly easy, so we'll get there in just a sec.